Could an obscure and idiosyncratic method for systematizing Christian scriptures really have a profound impact on the course of a country and the course of American culture? Well, Daniel Hummel thinks so, and he makes the case in his book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. Let me tell you what I thought.
Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz.
Okay, I have here a new copy of The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism by Dan Hummel from Eerdman's. Thank you to Eerdman's. Thank you to Dan, who actually reached out to me and had me get a copy for review. So thank you. All right, I want to go through my typical format here of the main idea of the book, the research, the readability, and the reasonableness of it. And I'm not going to be able to hold myself back. I'm going to say right out of the gates, I loved this book. Okay, so I'll get into my reaction there at the end more in depth, but I loved it. Just know that going up front, I'm going to be very positive. Okay, but it may not at the same time be quite for everybody. So the main idea of this book is captured really well in the title, and it's just the idea of it's a historical study tracing the impact of this one system of thought, namely dispensationalism, through decades, really over a century of American history, tracing it through key players, key kind of preachers, theologians, academics, mostly popular figures though, especially as it goes on, tracing the impact of this way of approaching Scripture through these key movements and key phases in history, down to really the present day. I mean, the last section of the book is like, he calls it pop dispensationalism, which goes from 1960 really up to the modern day. And he traces its rise, its impact, and really, I would say, outsized influence from what you'd expect it to have. Its rise and then its scholarly fall, but then its continued impact even into today. So that's really, it's an historical study. It's a study of America, especially American evangelicalism, through a particular lens, and that lens being how did dispensationalism affect it. Now, if you don't know what dispensationalism is, I don't know that I'm going to have time to fully unpack that term, but it refers to a way of viewing biblical history and the history of God and the world through dispensations, which is a term for specific kind of sections of time, and how God's relationship with the world and humanity and Israel and the church and all that stuff has like shifted in key ways through these dispensations. And it's really a system for kind of analyzing the biblical text, but also human history, and predicting what's going to happen. I interviewed Dan. I'm not exactly sure as I'm recording this, when that video is going to be posted, but if it's posted now or will be posted soon, you can watch that video for a much more deeper dive into some of the actual content there, if in case you don't know what dispensationalism even is. But that's the main idea. Tracing this way of thinking, this way of approaching the Bible through the history of evangelicalism and seeing its impact. Okay. The research behind this is outstanding. Dan, was not familiar with his work before this book, but as an historian, for lots of reasons, I'm going to be keenly following him moving forward, because his research I just frankly thought it was out of the park good. It's very clear. It's cited extremely well. You can track down sources when they show up, but he wisely deploys primary sources in many cases: quotes, sermons, writings, publications throughout a pretty wide swath of American history. His research is very fair when he's representing the views of certain people. It's very nuanced. He's not, from best I can tell, he's not putting up any straw men in his argumentation, and the way he leverages his sources lends a lot of credibility to the points he's making in his analysis and his historical judgments he's making. Extremely good research. In my view, the exact right balance of primary source integration, secondary source use, and also like the right balance of his own judgments alongside quotations, citations, all of that. Okay, readability. It's hard not to just gush too much because I love this book so much, but everything's just universally positive. The readability is so good. The readability is pitch perfect for, in my view, the balance of academic, serious historical work and also approachability. It is a little long. It is a little bit more on the academic side of the spectrum, but I frankly found it like really enthralling and gripping. Part of that admittedly might be my own experience growing up in the 90s and the heyday of Left Behind and pop culture, dispensational pop culture, evangelical stuff. So if you don't have that experience, you may not be quite as enthralled by the roots of it as I was, but But I would still hazard to say that I think most people, if you just have an interest in American religion and American evangelical history, if you just have an interest in it, this book is written to really pull you in. He does a fantastic job moving through phases of history, again, pulling on popular events, well-known names, and not well-known names. But the readability is it's not inscrutable in an academic way. It's not dumbed down either to try to make it like overly conversational. It's right in the right balance that I personally love for a book of this kind of scope and what it's trying to do. So great readability, great readability. And then finally, my reaction. I've already been kind of gushing about this, but my reaction to this book is extraordinarily positive. I loved it. I love these kinds of books in general. I've read a lot of histories of evangelicalism through different lenses. One of the more famous ones recently is Jesus and John Wayne, looking at it through masculinity, looking at that same period through masculinity. But there's Darren Dochuk has done some really great work looking at the impact of like the Sun Belt. He's also done work on the oil money. There's studies that are done through political lenses. Sarah Posner's book did a study through kind of the alt-right. I mean, if I start going down the list of all the different studies of American evangelicalism, this video will never end. So there's so many of them, and I love that kind of study. I love those kinds of historical works. I also liked Aaron Griffith's book on Law and Order. Yeah, so there's so many angles to get at this subject of what is American evangelical culture. Oh, Dan Silliman's book on the publishing industry. So yeah, and Karen Swallow Prior's upcoming book on the evangelical imagination. They all have important things to offer. This one is at the top of the list for me because of everything I've mentioned, but because it's also so rigorously argued and traced through this time, and you can really see, and I also love the nuance he brings. So when, for example, he talks about how dispensationalism was fed through the geopolitical reality of the Civil War era in American history. It's a fascinating idea that I'd never stopped to really think about. And he threads it through, and he talks about how the pressures these pastors in border states were facing to use dispensational ideas to kind of hold their white congregants together. It's a really powerful argument, and he brings in, and the reason I'm going here is because this is a great example of, I think, his nuance. He brings in race when it's a very appropriate factor to discuss in his historical study, but he does not overplay it or underplay it, both of which are strong temptations, I would say, in publishing right now. I think he leverages it correctly, he gives it the right weight in his historical study for the pressures that certain pastors and leaders were facing to leverage these ideas to maintain unity, at least of the white congregants in the Civil War era. It's a fascinating study and very, very persuasive. And that's the kind of argumentation he takes through each era in American history that he looks at. It pulls on the sources well, it's argued persuasively, it's nuanced, doesn't overplay or underplay things for dramatic effect. I just think it's really an outstanding historical study. It's, again, at the top of that list of those kinds of books that have been coming out in recent years. I would say it's one of my favorites. If not my actual favorite, I would need to do a little bit of thinking to figure out where exactly to put it. But regardless, my reaction is effusive, positive. I love it. Highly recommend this book to anyone with an interest in dispensationalism, in just general American religious history. If you're interested in figures like Dwight Moody, if you're interested in the fundamentalist movement more broadly, not just dispensationalism, but fundamentalism. If you're interested in where did Moody Bible Institute come from, if you're interested in the movement of Bible institutes and Bible conferences, the Schofield Reference Bible, if you're interested in any of that stuff, it's in here in spades. It's a fascinating study, very enlightening, very enriching for a deep understanding of how we got to where we are today. And the last section of the book is great for understanding how pop dispensationalism fuels things like conspiratorial thinking, end times predictions, how it's affected fiction. The Left Behind is the most obvious one, but there's so many ways that this way of thinking has touched pop culture and fiction that are surprising. And this book has it all there. So again, I'm going to end this video here before I ramble and gush too much. Absolutely, I love this book. Very excited about Dan Hummel as a kind of a new-to-the-scene historian. I hope he keeps doing work. I will certainly be following him closely because I love the way he approached this topic, and I hope that he brings his keen eye to more historical work. So, again, thanks to Dan Hummel. Thanks to Eerdman for the book. I am proud to gladly boast about this book on this channel, and I hope that some of you who are interested in this topic will take me up on it and give this one a read because it's well worth your time. So, as always, thank you for watching.